There's a photo on my phone I keep going back to. It's blurry. Bad lighting. Someone's elbow is half in the frame. But, in the center of it, there's a man doubled over a folding table, one hand pressed flat against the surface like he needs it to stay upright, and his whole face, this face that's been on stamps and magazine covers and the sides of commemorative mugs, is completely, helplessly, structurally unsound with laughter. That man is Prince William. And the thing that broke him wasn't a joke, exactly. It was a little plastic face. Yellow background. Wispy drawn-on hair. A tiny cardboard name card that read Gerald. I'll back up. It was the 3rd week of October. One of those London mornings where the sky can't quite commit, not raining, not clear, just a low gray ceiling sitting on top of the city like it forgot to leave. The kind of morning where you wear a coat you don't need and, then, carry it around all afternoon resenting it. The workshop was being held in a community arts center in Kensington. Not a grand building. Not a place you'd look twice at walking past. There was a banner outside that had been put up slightly crooked and never corrected, and it read, "The Kindness Comedy Initiative Open Doors, Open Mics, Open Minds." Someone had drawn a little smiley face next to it in marker. Not a good smiley face. The kind a child draws when they're more interested in the concept of a face than in executing one. Inside, about 40 people were setting up chairs in a rough circle. Volunteers from a mental health charity, some of them. Youth outreach workers. A few stand-up comedians who'd come through a community partnership program. A drama therapist named Bridget who had the kind of loud laugh that made strangers smile before they even knew what was funny. I was there as a facilitator. Which meant I was the person who carried the box of supplies and looked like I knew what I was doing even when I didn't. The box that morning contained, among other things, 3 sets of Guess Who? The board game, the one with all the little plastic faces on hinged panels, the one that most people haven't thought about since age 7. That was intentional. Bridget had designed the whole second half of the workshop around it. The idea was simple, the way all genuinely good ideas are simple. Guess who? Forces you to describe faces. And, when you describe faces, you reveal everything about how you see people. What you notice first. What you assume. Whether you lead with hair or skin or the shape of someone's mouth. It was an exercise about perception. About bias. About the comedy that lives inside the gap between how we describe ourselves and how others describe us. I'd run it twice before. It always went somewhere interesting. What I had not run it with, previously, was a future King of England. He arrived at 9:47. Not with a motorcade. Not with the full formality you'd expect. There were 2 protection officers, quiet men in quiet suits who positioned themselves near the door with the practiced stillness of people paid to be invisible. There was a single aide, a woman named Fiona who I'd been corresponding with for 6 weeks by email and who turned out to be about 12 years younger than I'd imagined her voice. And, then, there was William. He walked in holding a takeaway coffee cup, wearing a navy jumper with a slight pull at the left sleeve, the kind of thing that happens when you catch a cuff on a door handle and don't notice. He looked, honestly, like a man running slightly late to a meeting he wasn't certain he'd dressed correctly for. He shook hands. He made brief, quiet introductions. He asked if there was somewhere to put his coffee that wouldn't be in anyone's way, and, when Bridget pointed to the table near the wall, he said, "Perfect, thank you," and put it down and didn't touch it again for 2 hours. That's the detail people don't write about. The coffee going cold while he was actually present. The first hour of the workshop was standard warm-up games, some structured improvisation, a few minutes of sharing in pairs. William participated without performing. That sounds like a nothing observation, but it isn't. I've watched people in positions of visibility come into rooms like this and spend the entire time demonstrating that they're participating. They laugh louder than necessary. They make eye contact to show they're making eye contact. They perform ease. He just did the warm-up games badly, in some of them. When they did the one where you have to say a word and the person next to you has to immediately say the first word it triggers and not think, his chain went, Tuesday, umbrella, grandfather, biscuit, guilt. Bridget nearly fell off her chair. Guilt, she said. From Biscuit? He looked momentarily like a man who had exposed something he hadn't meant to. Then, he said, my grandmother used to say I ate biscuits like I was stealing them. The room laughed, warmly, and he laughed too, and whatever remaining formality was in the air dissolved right there. The Guess Who? Exercise started just after 11. Bridget explained the rules. Everyone knew them. The goal is to identify your opponent's mystery character by asking yes/no questions about their appearance. Does your person have glasses? Is their hair dark? Do they have a beard? You eliminate faces by flipping down panels until only one remains. But Bridget's version had a modification. Instead of standard questions, you had to describe physical features without using their names. You couldn't say beard. You had to say significant facial hair below the nose, extending to the jawline. You couldn't say glasses. You had to say corrective lenses, presumably prescription, dark frames. The point was to make people conscious of how clinical, how detached, how absurd purely physical description becomes. The comedy of it was guaranteed. The insight usually followed. William was paired with a youth worker named Marcus, 26, from Brixton, who had the quick, economical confidence of someone who spent his days managing rooms full of teenagers and had learned exactly how much authority to carry in his voice and exactly when to drop it. Marcus did not appear to find the fact of his opponent particularly remarkable. He set up his board, flipped all his faces to standing, and looked across the table like a man preparing for chess. Right, he said. Standard rules plus the new ones? The new ones, William confirmed. Cool. Marcus picked up his mystery card, looked at it, and put it face down. Age before beauty. William blinked. That means you go first, Marcus said, entirely straight-faced. The nearest facilitator, not me, I was at the adjacent table, made a sound that was technically a cough. William looked at his board. He turned over his mystery card. He looked at the face, and I know what it was because I've seen the photo that one of the protection officers, against what must be all protocol, apparently took on his personal phone and, which has since quietly circulated among everyone who was in that room. Gerald. The wispy-haired one. The one that always looks like he's just remembered he left the hob on. William studied the face for a long moment. Then, he said, with the careful, precise diction of a man attempting to follow the rules correctly, does your mystery person possess cranial coverage that could be described as sparse? Marcus looked at his board. Nah, he said. Full head of hair. Nice hair, actually. The way he said nice hair, actually, with a completely unreadable expression, took a full 3 seconds to land. Then, William got it. The laugh started somewhere in his chest. You could see it arrive before it came out, a kind of involuntary brace, like the body making room for something it hadn't planned for. He put his hand over his mouth. He took it away. He tried to recompose. He failed completely. The thing about a really good laugh, and, I mean the involuntary kind, the kind that gets in before you can stop it, is that it changes the architecture of a room. Not the physical room. The table was still folding and slightly wobbly, and there was still a drip mark on the ceiling tile from some past plumbing emergency. But the shape of the space shifted. The way people stood in it. The way they were allowed to look at each other. William had his hand flat on the table now. That's the photo. That's the blurry elbow-in-the-frame image on my phone. One hand on the table. Shoulders curved forward. The expression of a man who has completely lost the ability to arrange his face into anything other than this. Marcus was watching him with an expression of polite satisfaction, the way a craftsman watches someone discover that a thing they built actually works. Nice hair, actually, William repeated, between attempts at composure. You said nice hair, actually. I described what I saw, Marcus said. That was a William gestured. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. A description, Marcus agreed. Per the rules. The laughter wasn't performance. That's the thing I keep coming back to. There's a version of this story where a public figure laughs loudly and warmly, and everyone in the room exchanges glances that say, "See, he's just like us." Managed warmth. Curated spontaneity. A PR photograph with audio. This wasn't that. This was someone caught genuinely off guard by a 26-year-old from Brixton using a children's board game to deliver a remark so dry it had its own weather system. The laugh came out like something that had been waiting in a pressurized container and found a release valve that didn't know existed. And here's what I noticed: the protection officers by the door didn't move. Didn't exchange looks. Didn't do whatever it is protection officers do when a moment feels unscripted. They smiled. Both of them. The game resumed after a minute or so. William wiped his eyes, with the sleeve of the navy jumper, and straightened up and looked at his board with renewed focus. Marcus asked his first question with the same flat precision. Does your mystery individual have what might be described as a pronounced facial feature in the olfactory region? William looked at Gerald's large, slightly bulbous nose and said, solemnly, "They do." "Class," said Marcus, and flipped down 6 panels. He was good at this game. Genuinely, strategically good, asking questions that eliminated maximum faces per round, building a map of remaining possibilities with the patience of someone who was used to working problems that didn't resolve quickly. He'd chosen a woman with red hair and large hoop earrings, and he defended the information surrounding her like a man who had decided that his honor was at stake. William, meanwhile, was still on Gerald. He asked his second question: does your person's hair exhibit what I'd describe as an enthusiastic upward trajectory? Marcus studied his board. Does that mean, does it stick up? I'm following the rules. I think that's not a real description. I think that's a metaphor. A metaphor can be a description. Not in Guess Who? It can't. Bridget, who had been circling the tables to monitor progress, paused at theirs. She looked at William. She looked at Marcus. She looked at the boards. Is there a dispute? She asked. He's using poetry, Marcus said. I'm being precise, William said. You said enthusiastic upward trajectory. That's a stance, not a description. William considered this with the expression of a man who has been told, correctly, that he has lost an argument he thought he was winning. He looked at the Gerald card. Fine. Does your person's hair point up? No. 3 panels came down. Marcus said, without looking up, better. What happened at about 11:20 is the part of the morning I think about most. The game had reached its middle stages. Most of the pairs around the room were deep in their own boards, trading clinical descriptions with increasing absurdity. Someone at the far table had gotten into an extended disagreement about whether a unibrow counted as one facial feature or two, and it was escalating with genuine heat. The room had the comfortable, productive noise of people who'd forgotten, temporarily, to monitor themselves. Bridget rang a small bell. Transition. The next phase, instead of asking about other characters, you described yourself. You picked one feature. One physical fact. And you described it using the same clinical, rule-bound language. No vanity. No self-deprecation for effect. Just, what is actually there. The room went fractionally quieter at this instruction. This is always where the exercise shifts. This is the part that isn't funny anymore, or is funny in a different way, the way things are funny when they're also true. Marcus went first at their table. He looked at his hands, then said, I have a scar on my left jaw, approximately 4 centimeters, diagonal orientation, which I've had since I was 11. He said it with the flatness of a fact that has been carried for a long time and set down carefully rather than thrown. That's my one feature. No one asked. The rules said you didn't have to explain. William looked at his board for a long moment. Then, he said, I have a hairline that is in ongoing and unresolved negotiation with my forehead. The room detonated. Not unkindly. Not in the way that laughter sometimes arrives as a verdict. This was something warmer, the sound of 40 people recognizing that someone had just done an unexpectedly courageous thing and wrapped it in a joke because that's sometimes the only shape courage fits in. Marcus looked at him sideways. See, he said. Now that is a metaphor used correctly. They finished the game. Marcus won, because of course Marcus won, and the session moved into its final discussion phase. The tables got pushed back. People sat in a rough circle. Bridget asked a few open questions, the kind designed to draw out what the exercise had surfaced. What did you notice about how you described faces? What did you assume? Most people talked about the game. About how weird it felt to describe noses and hair without the usual shorthand. A woman named Priya said she'd realized she kept defaulting to what was wrong with a face, what was asymmetrical, what was unusual, instead of leading with what was there. A man named Ted said he'd spent the whole game avoiding describing his own character's skin tone, circling around it, and that avoidance had told him something he was still turning over. These were real observations. The kind that don't happen because someone prompted them but because the game created conditions for them to arrive. When Bridget got to William, she asked simply, "Anything surprise you?" He was quiet for a moment. Not performing quiet, actually thinking. Then, I think I describe people the way I've been taught to be careful about describing people. Which isn't the same as describing them accurately. There's a difference between conscious discretion and actually seeing someone. He paused. I'm not sure I always see people. I think I sometimes see the version of them I've decided in advance is safe to see. The room held that. Bridget said, "That's not a small thing to say." No, he agreed. It's not. The protection officers by the door were very still. Not alert still. Just still. The kind of stillness that means you are in a room where something real is happening and you understand that. By 12:30, the chairs were going back against the walls and people were finding their coats and the whole pleasant administrative dissolve of a ended session was underway. Someone had brought biscuits. Not the good ones, the thin, snapping ones that come in a blue tin and exist in community centers as a kind of universal currency. 3 of them were left on the table by the coffee urn when I went to start packing up the guess who? Sets. One of the protection officers materialized at my elbow, which I was not expecting, and said quietly, he'd like a minute with the group facilitators if that's convenient. It was convenient. We gathered me, Bridget, a comedian named Sal who'd run the morning's warm-up sessions near the side window, the one overlooking the car park where a silver van was waiting in a way that tried not to look like it was waiting. William came over with his recovered coffee, still cold, apparently, because he set it down after one sip and didn't try again. He said, "I want to come back. Not a visit. Actually participate." Is that something? He stopped. Start it again. I understand if the format doesn't accommodate that. But, I'd like to. Bridget looked at him for a moment with the expression she has when she's deciding whether someone means a thing or whether they're saying a thing because they think they should mean it. She said, "You'd have to be bad at some of it." I was already bad at some of it today. Enthusiastic upward trajectory, I said. He pointed at me. That was a valid description. It was not, said Sal, who had not been at that table and had clearly already been briefed. William smiled. It was the slightly tired, slightly real smile of a man who has laughed more in 3 hours than he'd planned to and is not entirely sorry about it. I know, he said. But, I stand by it. Fiona materialized with a schedule. There was somewhere to be. There is always somewhere to be. The goodbyes were brief and ordinary, which was the right way for them to be. Handshakes. Thank yous. Marcus and William spoke for about 90 seconds near the door, and I didn't catch what was said, but Marcus laughed once, a short, real laugh, and William nodded like he'd received information he was going to hold on to. Then, the door opened and the grey London morning took him back. I stood there holding 2 guess who? Boxes under one arm, listening to the parking lot sounds, doors, engine, the particular kind of quiet that comes after a certain kind of departure. Bridget appeared next to me. He meant it, she said. About coming back. I know. Most of them don't. She picked up her bag and her clattering collection of printed handouts and walked back toward the supply room, and I stood there for another moment with the games under my arm and the blurry photo already on my phone and the blue tin with 3 biscuits left in it. Here's what I think about when I look at the photo. Not the obvious things, not the strangeness of a royal in a folding chair, not the official warm glow story of a prince who came down off the balcony and sat with regular people and was charming. That story is real, but it's also a decoration. It's what you hang on the front of the thing. The actual thing is smaller and more specific. It's Gerald. It's the fact that a wispy-haired little plastic face with its permanently startled expression and its too large nose is the thing that got through the composure, the training, the 1,000 iterations of public-facing personhood. Not a grand gesture. Not a meaningful exercise. Not the second half of the session with its real questions and careful honesty. Gerald. Because that's how it works. You build the walls so carefully, you learn to control the face, modulate the voice, manage the laugh so it comes out at the right volume at the right moment. And then, someone says nice hair, actually with a completely straight face, and the control just goes. Like a loose thread. Like you pulled one small thing and discovered it was load-bearing. I think William knew that about himself, somewhere. I think the reason he laughed the way he did, helplessly, fully, hand on the table, was not because Marcus's joke was that funny. It was that it found a gap he hadn't noticed. And something came through it that had been waiting. There's a line Bridget uses when she talks about why comedy matters in therapeutic contexts. She says, laughter is the only emotion that can't be performed convincingly once you've stopped feeling it. You can fake a smile for a photo. You can force your eyes to be kind. But a real laugh, the involuntary kind, the kind that takes the body with it, you cannot manufacture once the moment has passed. It either happened or it didn't. It happened. In a Kensington Arts Centre with a crooked banner outside and a drip-stained ceiling tile and 40 chairs arranged in a rough circle and a children's game designed for 7-year-olds. It happened to a man who was going to be king, who walked in holding a cold coffee and walked out carrying whatever it is you carry when you've been genuinely surprised by yourself. I don't know what that weight feels like. I've never had to walk around with that particular arrangement of public expectation and private personhood and the negotiating that must happen, constantly, between the two. But I know what the laugh looked like. And I know that Gerald, wispy hair, startled eyes, the little nose, the name card that means absolutely nothing, was the thing that did it. Some days I think that's the whole story. Some days I think that is the whole story. A man walked into a room. A game got played. Something real came loose. And, somewhere in a Kensington Community Arts Centre, on a folding table, near a cold takeaway coffee cup, there is a plastic face called Gerald. He doesn't know what he did. But the rest of us do.